Hi, this is Dr. Ben Young, and you are listening to episode number 32 of the Perio Patient Podcast. And today let's talk about refined sugar and tooth decay. You recall a little while ago, if you've listened to earlier episodes on the subject of fluoridating the water, it was shown that the decay levels of children reduced by about 25%. And the reason is because the fluoride ion within the crystal structure of enamel makes that enamel stronger. But stronger against what? Well, the answer is against acids, against being dissolved. And what can dissolve enamel? The answer is bacteria in large enough quantities, which is what dentists and researchers refer to as plaque, and a newer term being used often is biofilm. And the biofilm, or the organisms colonized to great enough thickness and diversity, have the ability to excrete lactic acid. This acid then dissolves the enamel. And once the enamel has been dissolved through, the bacteria then have the ability to utilize the inner part of the tooth, the dentin, as a food substance itself. It doesn't need an outside source for food. The tooth itself becomes the food. And eventually the dentin is chewed up and softened, and the bacteria go through it all the way to the pulp of the tooth. As they get closer to the pulp, then the nerve fires off, and that's your toothache. So this is the relationship of tooth decay with toothaches. And it all begins with that refined sugar. Refined sugar is the favorite food substance of bacteria. And a good way to show this to children and also adults. Adults, you don't need to show it. You can just describe it. But essentially take 2 glasses of water, clear glasses of water, put them side by side. Take a stalk of celery and drop it into one of them. And take a sugar cube and drop it into the other one. And then ask the child what's happening. Well, in the glass with the celery, nothing's really happening. You just have wet celery. But in the other glass, the cube has disappeared. And what that means is that it is dissolved down to the molecules, the molecular size that bacteria without effort can absorb. When the sugar goes into the machinery of the bacteria, it is then used for energy. The energy powers everything for reproduction, which is growth and colonies of organisms. And eventually it's excreted as that lactic acid. So that's what's happening with tooth decay. Now, as a periodontist, let me share with you one to me, a very interesting thing when looking at a lot of patients doing examinations. People tend to be either caries, tooth decay prone, or periodontal disease prone. And what that means is, what it's really describing is that the bacteria that are necessary to cause the diseases compete with one another. And if somebody has a sugar habit, they may have enough concentrated organisms dissolving the teeth that the bacteria that cause periodontal disease can't really take a foothold. The other thing that can happen is if a person stops their sugar habit, and over a little bit of time, they might actually develop periodontal disease because of the fact that they no longer have the organisms causing decay in their mouth in the abundance that they once were. And so now other organisms are beginning to establish themselves. And if the person is genetically prone to periodontal disease, then they might encounter some organisms that begin to result in bone loss that we see in people with a periodontal disease picture. So you really, it's one of both, one or the other. Person is either decay prone or periodontal disease prone. Well, what happens when you see somebody that hasn't been around dentists for a while? Well, then you see superimposition of things. They can have some decay and they can also have some periodontal disease. What will take the tooth the fastest? Will it be the periodontal disease or will it be the tooth decay? The answer is tooth decay. Somebody can have no tooth decay and a year later be having pain and infections and having a broken crown from an extensive amount of tooth decay. That's pretty fast. Periodontal disease is normally a much slower process than that, unless there's some systemic compromise on somebody. The other thing I would tell you is that the type of decay that children get, which is more established in little fissures and pits and fissures of teeth, the big problem for adults is sugar in liquid. It's brewed iced tea with the brewed sugar that's dissolved. You know, if you just take iced tea and you drop a sugar cube in it, usually it goes to the bottom and you can stir it and you see some of the sugar granules just accumulating at the bottom. I don't know the chemistry of that, but that's what happens. But if you brew it, if you take like a Bill Miller's brewed tea, where you put the sugar in and you essentially boil it into the solution, that one is very, it'll cause a lot of decay. The other thing I will tell you about sugar in drinks like Coca-Cola, somebody can have a sugar habit and not take a lot of calories from it. In other words, you can decay your mouth by just sipping a drink over a long period of time. So one of the test questions that I can ask somebody is, are you somebody who can take a can of soda and sip it all day long, and it doesn't matter if the carbonation goes out of it and it becomes flat, it doesn't matter if it gets to room temperature, you'll just keep sipping it? Those are the people who can really cause a lot of damage. And the sad element of that too is once you start to restore teeth and you're putting crowns on teeth, people get the idea that the crowns make the teeth more resistant to decay. And that isn't true. What it does is it makes it harder to find decay that establishes itself under crowns and fillings, because the x-ray will not go through and show you the areas that are decayed. So it's more difficult to find decay after people have crowns. But if you're getting crowns and you're putting in fillings, don't believe that that tooth is now more resistant to becoming decayed in the future. It's as susceptible as before, if not a little more, because bacteria can colonize into little grooves and fissures and places around the crowns that are difficult, if not impossible, to clean. So people who have a lot of dental work, they need to be seen regularly and have cleanings and checkups to make sure that nothing is breaking down, and they are the ones who may benefit from added fluoride regimen, either in a mouthwash or some other method of adding more fluoride to their teeth to resist decay. On the other hand, people who eat a dessert with meals or can drink a soft drink right down do not tend to decay their teeth anywhere near as quickly as the sippers. But then, if the sugar gets past the mouth into the digestive tract, this is where the calories from the sugar become a nutritional problem, which ultimately may be worse for the individual because it leads to a lot of health problems you are already aware of, I'm sure. Finally, and this is just to be complete, because I also think this is really important, and this has really little to do with my specialty, my focus. I want to take this opportunity to talk about decay in infants. This is primarily caused by sugar in bottles or putting the child to bed with a bottle. Remember, milk breaks down to lactose, which is a sugar. And some people just use flavored drinks too. Frankly, this is one of the saddest problems dentists have to deal with, because it often means putting 2- and 3-year-olds in the hospital to be treated under general anesthesia. Yes, babies cry at times when put to bed, but before you give them a bottle, please talk with a pediatric dentist or pediatrician on best ways to handle these issues of bedtime so that you don't end up creating a disaster in their mouths. That's it. This has been the Perio Patient Podcast. If you found this information useful, please share it and give the podcast a positive review so others can find it. And as always, have a great day, and we'll talk again soon. Bye now. A cartoonist was found dead in his home. Details are sketchy. Now go fly.